Have you ever worked under a leader who runs the organization? Well, perfectly. The finances are flawless, internal politics seem smooth, meetings are sharp, but somehow everything just feels a bit stuck. Safe, maybe, well managed, yeah, but sort of slowly drifting towards irrelevance. That tension, that constant push and pull between maintenance and mission, between keeping the lights on and sparking genuine, sometimes difficult growth, that's what we're diving into today. We're unpacking some really interesting material here that argues the biggest challenge for leaders isn't always outside pressure. Sometimes it's about failing to shift from being like an excellent manager to an effective mobilizer.
Yeah, exactly. The research we looked at really highlights is this specific kind of internal problem. The authors actually call it stagnation from within. It happens when leaders get really good at the mechanics, the administration side, but they kind of forget the movement, the actual mission. So our goal today is really to examine the framework they're proposing for leaders to embrace what they call a dual calling. You have to be both shepherdy, caring for the community, and sender actively commissioning people out into the field.
Okay, right. So let's unpack that core imbalance first. The temptation, and it's a strong one for any leader, is just to focus inward. And that leads to what the material calls institutional drift. It makes sense, right? You prioritize comfort, preservation, but the cost is eventually relevance. You feel productive, you're busy running the machine, keeping everything tidy, but the whole horizon is just shrinking.
And this is exactly where that contrast between the manager and the mobilizer becomes so critical.
Yeah.
Now, we're not saying the manager role is bad. Absolutely not. They handle vital administrative stewardship, keep the books healthy, make sure oversight is crisp. That's essential.
Yeah.
But when leadership gets boiled down only to that internal stewardship function, when the entire focus is just preservation, well, the organization essentially locks the doors, pulls down the blinds on the outside world.
Whereas the mobilizer, they actually change the trajectory. This is the leader who helps set a course for, new territory, launches new initiatives. They're focused on expanding, on movements of discipleship. I really want to spend a minute on this story they shared about Elder Miriam, because it illustrates that turning point perfectly.
Oh, yeah, Miriam. She was like the quintessential manager at first.
Yeah.
Beloved, absolutely. She was great at mediating disputes, balanced the budget meticulously, kept the community financially stable, even while, frankly, attendance was steadily declining. But then she started wrestling with this really deep question. If our mission is supposed to be expansive, why is everything we do happening inside the same four walls with the same people year after year after year?
Okay, but hold on. Isn't the immediate fear there, the practical fear, that if she starts sending out her best people, the original group might just collapse? How did the material tackle that anxiety, that fear of loss?
That's a very real fear. And honestly, it's probably the default setting for purely managerial leadership. The way through it, according to this material, isn't just delegation, it's intentional reproduction. So in Miriam's case, this young couple saw a clear need nearby. Instead of just, a pat on the back and good luck, Miriam and her team spent months building a specific plan to train them, equip them, and then release them. The big shift was realizing their main job wasn't just holding things together, but actually generating new leaders who could sustain that new work.
And the result is fascinating, right? Because 12 months later, that new initiative had actually taken root. It produced its own leaders. And Miriam's original community, it hadn't shrunk or destabilized. It had multiplied life. That's such a profound difference, caretaker versus catalyst.
Right. And to pull off that kind of catalytic change, leaders need what the sources call an integrated vocation. The theological mandate they identify is basically that effective leadership has three parts working together. It's pastoral, so shepherding. It's formative, meaning teaching and discipling. And it's apostolic, that's the sending and commissioning piece. You absolutely have to hold care and mission together. They're not opposed, they're intertwined.
Okay, so this gives us a practical flow, a kind of sequence derived from Scripture. Shepherd first, then train, then send. Why is that order so important? Why is it non-negotiable?
Well, because the shepherding part, attending to people, forming their character, that creates the essential foundation. As the authors really stress, you cannot successfully send out what you haven't first formed. It just doesn't work long term. If you try to prioritize sending without that solid pastoral care and training bedrock, well, you end up creating scattered, fragile initiatives. They just lack the resilience, the theological depth maybe, to survive when the inevitable external pressures come along. So the order really dictates sustainability.
So if the goal is a sustained movement, not just a flash in the pan, you need that strong inner core first. This brings us to that great visual metaphor, the material uses for this integrated vocation. The idea that the leader needs to hold two things at once, the crook and the telescope.
Yeah, I love that metaphor.
Yeah.
It really captures the necessary tension, doesn't it? The crook, obviously, is for tending the immediate needs, the intimate stuff right there at your feet.
Yeah.
The counseling, crisis intervention, just being present. It's the tool of close-up care, keeping the flock safe and guided day to day.
The telescope.
The telescope that represents the prophetic foresight, the strategic view. Looking out. It forces the leader to constantly scan the mission field, asking those harder questions. Who isn't here yet? What context are we missing? Where do we need to go next? See, if you only hold a crook, you become short-sighted, reactive. Excellent at internal management, maybe, but ultimately directionless. But if you only hold a telescope, you can neglect the very people you're meant to care for, and you become this sort of ungrounded visionary. Holding both that's the heart of real mobilization.
Okay, that really shifts the conversation from the why to the how. If we accept the shepherd-sender identity as the goal, well, just being a good person isn't enough, right? We need the actual skills. How does a leader practically acquire what they need to break out of that managerial stagnation?
They absolutely need a specific blended set of competencies, skills that are, simultaneously pastoral and missional. So on the pastoral relational side, things like deep listening, real skill in conflict resolution, solid counseling abilities, and crucially, that includes integrating biblical truth with the humility to know your limits, when to refer someone to a professional because their need goes beyond your scope of care. That's core shepherd skill.
Right. But a good manager might already have some of those foundational skills. Where does the multiplication piece really kick in? How does it become generative?
It kicks in with the ability to reproduce themselves, to train others. The material really emphasizes that leaders have to master reproducible disciple-making methods, things that non-specialists, regular people, can easily learn and then immediately teach to others. They mention specific tools like the Timothy 2.2 chain, which is basically just a repeatable model, train faithful people who can then train others, and also things like Discovery Bible Study.
Wait, can you quickly explain Discovery Bible Study, or DBS, for anyone not familiar?
Sure. DBS is a really simple, inductive way to engage with Scripture. It's designed so that non-experts can lead meaningful spiritual conversations right away. The focus is on asking a few core questions about a passage like, what does this tell us about God? What does it tell us about people or humanity? And crucially, what are you going to do about it this week? It ensures people hear and apply the text directly without needing, say, a seminary degree to lead. These kinds of reproducible methods are key for contextualization too, letting the mission adapt easily to different settings.
Got it. So the goal isn't just making leaders, it's making trainers. That seems to be the engine behind what the sources call multiplication by design and this idea of an apprenticeship ladder.
Precisely. It's about an intentional, even rigorous path. It's the opposite of just casual mentorship. It moves a trainee through really distinct phases. First, maybe you just shadow an experienced leader, just watching how ministry happens. Then they start to co-lead, sharing some responsibility. Then they move to lead with coaching, showing more independence, but still getting feedback. And finally, the crucial step. They have to demonstrate reproduction. They have to show they can train someone else.
And the key accountability measure here, the thing that really makes it stick, is what the authors call the reproduction gate.
Yes, that gate is absolutely non-negotiable if you want to build a multiplying culture. The principle is, a leader shouldn't be fully commissioned or released until they've clearly demonstrated they can train at least one other person in the method. This ensures you're certifying future trainers, not just capable doers. Because if a leader can't pass on their skills effectively, well, the forward mission kind of stops with them, right? And then the institution slides back towards maintenance.
Okay, so beyond the individual leader skills, the organization itself needs systems to actually support this. What kind of governance changes did the material suggest to structurally nudge leadership past that maintenance default?
Yeah, structure really matters here. It has to make sending easier, more natural. They detailed 3 main examples. First, setting up a small, dedicated sending fund, something specifically earmarked to seed new initiatives outside the regular operating budget. Second, adopting a simple, maybe one-page sending covenant.
A sending covenant. What exactly would be in something like that?
It's basically a simple agreement, both legal and spiritual, that outlines the ongoing relationship between the sending body and the new work. It would define, say, the core doctrine they agree on, the schedule for ongoing mentoring or coaching from the mother organization, and clear review points for assessment and accountability. It formalizes the connection without being overly bureaucratic or controlling. And third, they recommended using multiplication maps. These are basically visual tools to track, say, unreached areas or demographics, identify potential leaders within those contexts, and strategically plan future growth. These kinds of structures help turn the vision from just a nice idea into an accountable, funded reality.
These systems sound great on paper, but we all know good intentions can hit roadblocks. What were some common pitfalls the sources warned about? Things that can derail multiplication even when leaders are trying to adopt this framework.
Oh, definitely. One of the most common they highlighted is overcare. Smothering, basically. This is the shepherd instinct, the crook, focused maybe a bit too intensely inward. Leaders end up doing ministry for people, keeping them dependent and unintentionally hindering their maturation. The guardrail there is having those clear apprenticeship milestones and definite exit points, ensuring the trainee actually achieves genuine independence and capability.
And related to the sending side, the telescope side, there's the danger of cultural imperialism.
That's a big one, yeah. The pitfall is just planting an exact carbon copy of the mother institution in a totally new and different context without really considering the cultural fit. The guardrail has to be intentionally training people to think contextually and then evaluating new works based on things like local ownership and actual fruit in that context, not just how much they look like the original church back home.
And then, of course, the danger that can take down even the best leaders. Elder burnout. Just doing too much, not releasing enough.
Absolutely. If the core leaders are trying to do all the forming and all the sending themselves, burnout is almost inevitable. So the guardrail has to be implementing healthy delegation rhythms, ensuring there's peer care for the leadership team itself, and maintaining sustainable spiritual practices. Mobilization has to be shared, not heroic.
Okay, so what about measurement? If leaders are shifting away from just managing, they need to stop prioritizing only the typical institutional metrics. Counting heads and seats or just checking if the budget balances. What new key performance indicators or KPIs should a truly sending leadership team actually be tracking?
Right, they need balanced KPIs that track the generative, outward-focused activity. The material suggested three crucial ones. First, the reproduction ratio. This is basically the percentage of apprentices who successfully train at least one other leader within a set time frame, maybe 12 months.
So that directly measures whether that reproduction gate we talked about is actually functioning?
Exactly. It forces the focus onto multiplication, not just addition. Second, the local ownership rate.
Yeah.
This tracks the percentage of key leadership roles in the new works that are actually held by leaders who are indigenous or contextualized to that specific environment.
So that's how you'd know if you're falling into that cultural imperialism trap you mentioned.
Precisely. You measure who actually holds the influence and responsibility.
Yeah.
If years later the new work is still primarily led or funded by outsiders from the sending organization, you probably have an outpost, not a truly indigenous movement. This rate gives you a hard metric. And third, competency milestones. This is more qualitative, assessing the demonstrated teaching ability and pastoral care skills of leaders before they are commissioned and sent out. Taken together, these kinds of metrics shift the entire leadership focus from just maintaining the existing thing to actively mobilizing new things. Ultimately, that tension we started with between the manager and the mobilizer, it finds its resolution when deep theological conviction actually shapes practical, on-the-ground competency. Competence without character, that might produce efficient managers, but probably shrinking organizations. But character without competence, that often leads to well-intentioned but fragile, unsustainable experiments. You truly need both.
So what does this mean for you, listening right now? This framework, it isn't just a simple checklist or a manual. The material really presents it more like a map for a deep transformation in how we even think about leadership identity. The challenge it puts before you is actually quite practical. What current, maybe even essential seeming maintenance tasks could you stop doing? What administrative machinery could you delegate or empower someone else to handle, specifically to free up your time for coaching, for developing others, for reproduction?
Because when leaders really learn how to do both, comfort the immediate needs of the flock right here, while also commissioning workers for the wider field, that's when the community starts to shift. It becomes less like a museum, preserving piety, and more like a dynamic, generative, sending community.
So the only real question left hanging, I think, is this. For the next chapter, the next movement of your organization, whose hands are going to be holding both the crook and the telescope?